Good morning. I am glad that you have been able to join us upon this first day of the week with here from Dora Church of Christ. This morning, as we look into the lesson, I would like for us to think about this idea of doing the work of God. What does it mean? Or maybe how important is it? What does it really look like to us? And I want each of us to try to take this idea in our mind and to realize that God has asked me to do a work that is so direly important. As one who belongs to Him, as one who has given themselves over to Him. Sometimes it's difficult for us to remember or to think about the importance of who we are as children of God. This morning, I want you to put yourself in, if you're at home, it's not a difficult situation, but I want you to close your eyes and I want you to begin to think of the darkest, most incapable moment that you find yourself in, whether it be emotional, spiritual, mentally, and maybe even physically. Put yourself into that point where you're at your darkest moment and dwell on that darkest moment here for just a moment. And I want to read a scripture from Genesis, the first chapter, verses 3 through 5, and you have your eyes closed and you find yourself in a dark, dark place. He said, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night, and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Can you imagine finding yourself in there? And each one of us should be able to find ourselves in a dark place, a place that is without light, a place that is maybe without hope in our mind. We've all been there, whether we understood it or not. We often take this light that God has given us for granted. The sun rose in the morning and we just assume that it will rise again tomorrow. And that's just the way it is. We take it for granted. The sun comes up and the sun goes down. I remember as a kid many years ago, we were able to visit Carlsbad Caverns several times. But the first time I went to Carlsbad Caverns, we were about halfway down the trail, or maybe three quarters. And they stopped and talked about how they were going to turn off the light and how it was going to be so dark that you could not see your hand in front of your face. And they weren't joking. It was dark. And as I clung close to those who I was with, my family, and I became very concerned that we might never see light again. I grew up in an era for some reason where I was very afraid of the dark. I think we all are if we come right down to admit to what real darkness is. We are a little fearful of it. We don't know what's out there. We don't know what's around. We don't know what's lurking around the corner we cannot see. It was, however, when those lights were turned on, it was for a young child a glorious thing. It was something that was really exciting to me. It was something that made me feel so much better. I could see. I knew what was before me. I knew what was trying to sneak up on me, or at least I could see that there was nothing. You see, those lights seemed brighter than they had before, but I did not, for the rest of that day, take them for granted. And as we began to walk back out of that cave into the sunlight, it was even brighter and more inviting than anything I had ever set upon. As I grew older, I spent many hours sitting in the saddle, waiting for daylight to come up. I sat there and traced off across the canyons in a direction that I knew was right, in a portion of land that I didn't know exactly where was at. And I knew more or less how to get there, but you get about halfway, and you begin wondering, am I in the right place? You don't see the landmarks you see in the daylight. You don't see the things that warn you in the daylight. You take your time, but you take it easy, and you go 10, 5, 6, 7 miles across these canyons, and you find yourself in a place waiting early for morning, waiting for any sign of anything that says you're not lost or that things are not awry somewhere. And when that sun begins to creep up over the horizon, it is always a welcoming event. We're given many times the occasion biblically to think on the light. What does it mean? What takes place? In Genesis, the 7th chapter, once again, we find a world that is in chaos, in trouble, in difficult situations. And Jesus, or God, tells Noah, he said, you build an ark and you put yourself on it. One can imagine the dark, gloomy situation that Noah was placed within. Being in that ark for approximately 1 year. We don't think about being on there. We hear 40 days and 40 nights, but it says it rained and flooded for 40 days and 40 nights. Can you imagine the darkness that was upon Noah? He wasn't seeing the light. There was no light to see. Can you imagine how we would feel not seeing daylight for 40 days? I'm one that it really affects. And we also consider the death and the loss that Noah would have experienced to see the sun truly shine when the rain subsided, to see those little vents of light coming in the top part of that ark. And you imagine what he felt when he opened that window the first time. Can you imagine what was felt in their beings when they opened the door and the sun shone upon them? It must have been a very difficult time. But when those doors opened, there must have been jubilance because everything was clean, everything was washed and cleared. If we go over to Luke, the 23rd chapter, probably for me, it's one of the greatest visuals given on the darkness and on light. Only it's working in the opposite direction. The light was there among them. He had walked on this earth. He had given himself, had given his life, those 3 years of ministry. And he had walked on this earth and he had shown his light and he had taught them who he was and what could be. But in the 23rd chapter, verse 44, finds himself on the cross, this Christ. I want us to listen to what's said in this verse. In verse 44, he said, and now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sunlight failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now, when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And the crowds that had assembled for the spectacle, or for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breast. You see, they found themselves in such darkness that they were in turmoil. Chaos had come about. You see, no matter the darkness, whether it is emotional or mental, physical, spiritual, it is a fearful place, but this place of spiritual darkness has to be far more fearful than anything we have faced in our life except the time when we were following Satan. The time when we were living in sin and we did not have a way to go. I want us to look at a couple of places where we find those who received the light. What it was like, what it seemed to give them. If we go back to Mark, the 5th chapter, we find this one who was demon possessed. He was in such situation that he didn't know where to turn or what to do. And I want you to listen to what he says. Is in chapter 5 of Mark, verse 1, he says, "And they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And he lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs of the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirits." Now, there's much more to this, but this idea that this man was in turmoil, this man's life was in chaos. He lived in darkness. He lived in fear all the time of what was going to happen to him, of where he was at, of the things that were happening. And as Jesus commanded those spirits to leave him, the turmoil was so vast in this man that when the spirits left him and went into the hogs, they ran over the bluff. Can we imagine the turmoil and the darkness that dwelled in this man's life as he lived among the tombs, as he screamed day and night from the anguish that he was in, not physical, but the emotional, the pain, the things that were within him, the evil that reigned inside of him. I want us to listen to what happened when those demons left him. They went into the pigs, and they went over the cliff. But in verse 17 of chapter 5, it says, "And they began to beg Jesus to depart from the region, those men that were there. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him, and he did not permit him, but said, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you.' And he went away and he began proclaiming in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled." Can you imagine? I want us to look back just a moment. I missed a space here. In verse 15 it says, "And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man," these herdsmen that had left. They came back and saw this demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. It says he was sitting and visiting with Jesus. He came from a spot where there was chaos and difficult situations and turmoil in his life, and he was calm and at peace, and he was speaking with Jesus. It says when he left, he wanted to go with him. He wanted to follow him, and yet Jesus told him to stay with his people and go tell them. And he went to the city, and he began preaching the word of God, telling about this Christ. Do you understand the change that this light brings into one's life when he says he's the light, or he is the life? I want us to look at the Samaritan woman in John, the 4th chapter. I don't want you to think about her. She found herself in a different situation. She had come to Christ, and he said, "If you would follow me, if you would take the water that I have, you would never thirst again." But he began speaking with her and talking to her and talking about what situation she had found herself in. And he asked her where her husband was, and she said, I'm not married. He said, you're correct. He said, you've been married 5 times. Now, there are many who say that she had been divorced those 5 times. I don't know if she was or not. But the fact was, she had been married 5 times, and she was likely this idea of living in great sin. She was coming to this well because she did not want to face the things she had to face at the well that was within the city. She was coming to it at an hour at high noon when no one would have went to the well. They would approach the well early or late. But here she was living a life that was full of turmoil, and the one she was living with then was not her husband. She likely was degraded, likely was not a woman to be seen with. She was a Samaritan at that, and even the Samaritans looked down upon her. It's difficult for us to think about it, but we've lived the same life that this woman was living in some manner. We lived in a sinful world. We lived in a sinful place, a place that was without hope. And when he told her this thing, she said, surely this is the Christ. Surely this is the Messiah. If we go to John 4 and we go back to 31, he says, meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. And so the disciples said one to another, has anyone brought him something to eat? And Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me to accomplish his work. I want us to think about this idea. If we're following Christ, this is our work. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do not say, yet there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest. Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see the field, for they're white and ready to harvest. That's our job. I want us to listen to what the woman did when she realized that she had met the Messiah. In verse 27, it says, just then the disciples came back and they marveled that he was talking with a woman. But no one said to him, what do you seek? Why are you talking with her? And so the woman left her water jar and went into the town and said unto the people, come and see who told me all that I had ever done. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him. In verse 39, it says, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. Folks, this idea of seeing the light, of realizing that the light has come, you see how important it was to these two people? How important it was to these people, to these Samaritans that were in the town. They were coming out to see the Christ. They were living in a situation where life was full of turmoil, and the Samaritans lived in that manner. They were hated. This man who ran among the tombs was left alone by himself. He was an outcast. He was evil. He was full of these evil spirits, and no one could control him. And yet the light came into his life and controlled him. John, the first chapter, first few verses. I have marked 1 through 13, but the first few verses, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him not anything was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. It shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So this is the word, this word we're talking about, and there's a lot of meaning to this word logos that we don't have the time to go through. But in verse 14 it says, and the word became flesh, and he dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. In other words, this word was Jesus, was Christ. He was the light. I want us to realize that John is talking in the past tense here because these things have happened. The Christ has came. The Christ has died upon the cross. He has given himself and his blood for salvation, or for as sacrifice for forgiveness of sin. The light exposed the truths of God. Those truths that could reconcile man to God. These truths expose the works of the world and the evil that lay within. It exposes the lies of Satan that created these evils. Those things that cause man to live in dark places, following fate without love. You know some of these people. I've watched people. I've been in this situation just following fate. Just letting things happen because we were just washed back and forth, tossed about as though we don't know where to go. We don't or are unable to make up our minds. We walk in sin and live in sin before we find Christ. And we don't have anything but turmoil in our lives, whether we see it or not. You see, the world seeks after self, that which can never be content or satisfied. A life without real love and a life without real hope, a life without any purpose. This word purpose is very important. A life without any purpose. It's because of the hope we have a purpose. It's because of the sacrifice of Christ we have a purpose. In this reading, the word, that word, has the very character of God. It was the very character of God. This Jesus was the very character of God. The light that exposes, just as God's creation brings light to overcome the chaos and darkness. You see, before God came and created this world, or before God created this world, there was nothing but chaos. Nothing had any order, and he said, let there be light, and there was light. That light changed the world from chaos to a place that was full of light, to a place that had order, to a place that became great. Just as the chaos of the spiritual darkness, just as Christ comes into our lives as those lost in sin, he comes into that spiritual darkness and he exposes everything, and the light changes us and brings us peace. To bring hope to a lost world. To bring hope to a lost world. Now I want us to think about, because he uses a word in verse 5 of John, the first chapter. He said that light shines in the darkness. That light is everlasting. It does not go away. You see, the Christ did the cross. The cross did not dim that light in any manner. He said the darkness has not overcome it. Even through the turmoil that they were living through as John wrote this book and as they faced the later days, he said it did not overcome the light. The word shines, this verb, is that which indicates an ongoing action. The light that was shining while Jesus walked this earth still shines. It was not dimmed by the cross. That light shines through you and through me. We are the light. He says we're the light. We belong to him. John in the 3rd chapter in verse 18 and 19. It says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. In other words, he shall have light. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Now verses 18 and 19. He said, whoever believes in him is not condemned. But whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. You see, there is still evil in the world. We still live in darkness, and yet he says there is still light here. The light of Christ still shines. How does that light shine? You see, man has to determine whether he is going to follow the light or not. He has to accept whether he's going to let that light enter into his life and give him true life. to open up the true meaning of who he is and what he's capable of. But what he's capable of spiritually. John 8:12 again, he says, and again, Jesus spoke to them, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but he will have the light of life. If we have followed Christ in baptism, if we have given ourselves to him, if we are children of God, then we have the light of life. It is within us. It is ours to give to others. It is ours to show who this Christ is. That light still shines. Matthew 5:16, it says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Think about that. He didn't say give glory to you. He didn't say give glory for you. He said let those good works shine in you. Let your light shine before others so that they might see, or so that they might glorify your Father. Your Father, so that they might glorify God. Show them the works of Christ. When they see the works of Christ, they know it's not of man. It has to be of God. This idea of beginning to show others who they are, what they are, how they have come into this world and lived a life, or how they can come into this world and live a life for God. You see, we're to have purpose in this life. He didn't let us here. He didn't give us this forgiveness of sin for us to just sit around and wait for faith to take its course. He gave us purpose. He said, this is where I want you to go. This is what I want you to do. I want you to work for me. I want you to show others who this Christ is. I want you to show others that God is a loving God who cares for them, who seeks them, who seeks to bring them out of this place of chaos. Look back at your life. Can you see what God has done for you? Can you see what he is, how he has given you light, how he's given you direction, how he's given you purpose, he's shown you hope. The Hebrews 1, let their light shine in a dark world. In Galatians 5, starting in verse 24, we talk about these things, the fruit of the Spirit. But in verse 24, he said, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. I need to get rid of me. I need to remove my feelings. I need to remove my thoughts, my ideas. I need to remove myself from this and give myself over to God and say, I'm yours to use. Mine is to do the work of God. A work that he has prepared beforehand, before we were even known as children of God. He says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. You see, to live my life as Christ lived his, being a light, loving and serving mankind and God, is showing others that there is hope in this world, giving the love that God has given us, helping others see the salvation of a loving God, of one who cares about people, everyone. Even those who are the vilest of sinners, he has a love and a care for them if they will come to him. We must realize the vastness of the gift that we as children have been given by God, that of bringing the light of hope to the world that is lost in darkness and in chaos. Once again, Paul speaking of himself in Acts, the 26th chapter. Acts 26, verse 15 through 18. I want us to listen to what Paul, and he's saying this of himself, of who he was, as he talked to Agrippa, as he held him there, and he began to explain to him who he was and what had happened on the road to Damascus, and why he had become who he had become, why he stood up for Christ, why he preached the gospel. Starting in verse 15 of chapter 26 of Acts. He said, and I said, who are you, Lord? This is when he was humble before God, and he found himself blinded. And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you were persecuting. But rise and stand up on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. Now, we may not find ourselves in this situation, but if we are children of God, we have realized that we were in sin. We gave our lives over to God, and we became his obedient servants. Or that was the idea. That's who we should be. In verse 17, he says something that we need to keep in our mind. This is who we should be. He said, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from the darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they might receive forgiveness of their sin and place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. This idea of taking the word to those who are lost. Not that what I am doing is of great importance. God could use anyone. But he sought to use me as a child of God. He says, you are the one I want. Each one of us. He said, you can deliver the word to those who are lost. You can show them the way to Christ. You can give them this hope of eternity with the saints in heaven with God, of being there, living with him. But verse 18, it's what it is about, this walking in light. To open their eyes that they may turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, that they might receive forgiveness of sin and a place among those who are sanctified by faith, who are cleansed by faith, to have an eternity with God. You see, as children of God, it is so important. We live in a world full of darkness. And some of us might say more now than has ever been, but the world has lived in darkness. Ever since Christ came and they put him on a cross, there was a darkness that come over this world. And those who refuse to accept the Christ live in this darkness. They live in chaos. They live in turmoil. They live following fate. Maybe today you're one of those who is living in that situation. But just following fate, waiting for something to happen, being tossed to and fro, and finding yourself without any hope, without any purpose. There is a God who loves you. There's a God who cares for you. There's a God who will give you an eternal life in him. He will open up your life and he will shed light on those things that you can do living for him. If you are a child of God today, you have the availability to spread the light of Christ within a world of darkness and turmoil, of showing others who the Christ is. It is our opportunity. It was given to us. It is our purpose. God seeks for us to do his will. He seeks for us to follow him. He seeks for us. He seeks for us to spread his light, to be that one who shines in a dark, dark world. It may be that you are lost and without Christ. There's always an invitation open to you. God will always take you if you'll come to him. If you're seeking God, if you're seeking to change your life, I ask that you would contact me in some manner. We do everything that we can to help you find those things to go through and study this word that belongs to Him, that belongs to God. If you're a child of God today and you just find yourself short of these things, I hope that it encourages you to realize the importance, the greatness of the task that God has set before us, and that He's always there with us. He's there to give us everything we need to continue doing His work, to continue shining His light. Whatever it might be, if you are in need, I ask that you would get a hold of me through Facebook in some manner. I'll be happy to help you. I'll be happy to study with you and give you the things that you need. Thank you for being here with us this morning, and may God bless you.